This episode is sponsored by our friends over at Airbnb. If you're itching for your next weekend getaway, remember, some trips are better in an Airbnb. Now let's get this thing going.
I used to be a crash out. I really had to get a grip on even my anger and how I respond to things and where it was coming from and generational trauma and like how that showed up.
That was when I had that moment with the National Guard, and I'm telling you, I blacked out in that moment because I just felt so much pain. I'm glad that I could just let it out because a lot of people cannot.
But he was like, every space you enter, you are going to disrupt that space because these spaces are not built with you in mind. Even your mere presence is causing these people to rethink the way that they look at and see the world.
So, Mom, we're talking about a lot of heavy stuff today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds heavy.
The intersection between mental health and social injustice and the systems, you know, as they put it back in the old days, the man. So I'm curious of how that all affected you growing up. It's so broad, but like, let me get kind of like more micro level with it. How was it for you growing up in a very segregated state like Illinois?
Right.
How did it affect your mental health?
You know what? Obviously, you grow up and it is what it is. You don't question a lot. But I do know that I lived in a small area called Robbins. And Robbins was surrounded by white communities. You had Midlothian, you had Alsip, and you had Crestwood and Blue Island. So there was like these 4 towns surrounding this all black town. And we didn't have anything in our town. We didn't have a gas station. At one time, we did have a grocery store, but that didn't last. And so we were forced to go outside of our black community that was in the middle of all these white communities, and we would go and support their stores. And when we would go, they'd call us niggers and go home nigger, blah, 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 blah. And that was
the
kind
hard
of,
R.
Yeah, that was nigger. Yeah, they was like nigger. Yeah.
And, Mom, please don't make me laugh.
And I remember one time my mother had just brought like a station wagon. They had like a hatchback, like you could, you know, back in those days, they didn't have all the rules. Like you didn't have to wear seatbelts or anything like that. I was like maybe 7 or 8 years old. And I remember riding in the back of my mother's station wagon, and it was hot. She didn't have any air conditioning. So she raised the back door of it. And I was just laying there and I had fallen asleep. And I remember waking up and this guy was honking his horn. He was like, "I hope you fall, nigger. I hope you die. I hope you fall, nigger." And I just never forgot that. I mean,
that's pretty heavy.
I just was like, it really did something to me because I was like, he really wants me to fall out this car and die. And I just thought like, wow, that's a lot, you know? I just thought that was a lot. And then going to high school in Payless, which was an area that was really upper middle class. Like a lot of the kids had beautiful homes and stuff like that. I noticed that the kids that were from Payless, they were more welcoming than the kids that were from the Midlothian and Alsip. So the white kids that were the same economic background that we were from, they hated us. But the white kids that had more money and was little, you know, higher and, you know, up the chain, they accepted us.
Interesting. What do you think that means?
I don't know. I mean, as I got older, I just looked at it like maybe they saw us as a threat, you know?
The ones in your
the one that was like
saw y'all as a threat.
Yeah, I think the ones that were in the towns that probably didn't have too much more than we had, they saw us as a threat, as if they're taking our place.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like they're taking our place, they're taking something from us type of vibe. That's what I got from it. You know what I mean?
How did that make you feel?
Well, I grew up with a mother who was frightened by white people. She was very afraid of white people. She had grown up in Memphis, Tennessee, and she would tell us stories of her being downtown Memphis and like white men would be in the car and they say, "Come here, gal, you know, come here, gal." And, you know, you had to come if they called you. And she went over to the car and they'd be exposed, you know.
Oh, shit.
And she'd run and scream and they'd be laughing. So she was frightened very much of white men, you know, to the point where when I was like I was one of the stars in the school play, she told me I can't come. There's too many white people.
Damn.
Yeah, she said I can't sit in that auditorium. And at the time I was like, what? I thought it was so crazy. But as as I got older and stuff, and I heard so many other stories, and people have phobias and triggered, I just accepted. I was like, my mother was so frightened of white people from growing up in the South, and
But one thing begots another, and the anxiety that grandma holds, and even what she held, she's no longer with us, rest in peace. It also makes me think back to how I remember when The Help came out, and you were telling me about how grandma was pretty much like, her mom was like the Viola Davis character a little bit, except she went across town to take care of these 3 young white boys that grew up with her as their mother, to the point that when she passed away, they were front row at her funeral. But during her having to leave to go take care of them, she left grandma at home where she was essentially attacked. I don't want to go into all the details, but while her mother was going and being a mother to these other children to make money, you know what I mean, to be a housekeeper, to be a caretaker, she had to leave her own daughter behind, where her own daughter had experienced
she's molested by her uncle, and then now you got a kid that's...
I think those are definitely systemic
exactly
effects that lead to mental health.
But to talk about my grandmother
issues.
even more so, yes, she was I forget what they called it back in the day, a domestic. Yeah, so she worked in this rich lawyer's home in Memphis, and he had 3 sons or 2 sons, I don't recall. But I remember when her daughter got sick, my Aunt Ruby, I never met her. She passed away in her early 20s, and she got tuberculosis. In the 40s and the 50s, there was a mass epidemic of tuberculosis, and people were dying, so very similar. And my Aunt Ruby got tuberculosis, and so my grandmother, her name was Isla West. Isla West went to her boss, who was this rich white lawyer in Memphis, and said, my daughter has tuberculosis. She's in a sanatorium, and she has 3 kids. And her husband is trying to take the kids from me. My daughter left the kids with me, but now he's coming to get the kids. Can you help me? And he said, Isla, I don't represent niggas.
Damn.
So my grandmother couldn't stop him. He came and got the 2 older kids and left the baby. He said he didn't think the baby was his. And so my grandmother raised my cousins, my mother's nephew, raised my first cousin, Johnny, and she raised him as he was her own. And I guess he, never really knew who his father was. If he did, I don't know that story. But that same family, my grandmother kept working for them. And you're right. When the father died, he had paid for my grandmother's house. So I guess he didn't represent niggas, but he paid for their houses, I guess.
That's so weird.
I don't know. So it's kind of like the good and the bad. I don't even know how to take that. I don't know. But
me neither.
But yeah, so
weird.
That's how the story goes. So,
but all of that is just so nuanced, and people are so affected. Like, all of that is just so terrible.
Well, it totally affected my mother, obviously, because
I'd be scared of that.
She didn't come to live with her mother until she was maybe 12 or 13. By then, now who knows what she's been through, and now she's a teenager trying to figure things out, and coming from Mississippi and Memphis. And she just told me the first thing that she did was to try to get out,
Sure.
And that's how she ended up in Chicago. She came to Chicago just trying to better her life and, just get out the South,
know. Yeah. I remember when we first started talking about anxiety and stuff like that, and just to me, a lot of that is epigenetics, because some stuff it's just passed down. It's just so interesting. I remember I had a conversation with a meditation lady when I first started getting into all that stuff, and she was like, when you heal yourself, you heal your ancestors. And I just didn't know what that meant. But in the concept of what we know to be scientific with epigenetics, it makes total sense, where when we started talking about that became healed in our bloodline. So it then is no longer going to be transferred over. Yeah. And if there's any remnants, there's going to be an awareness around it. Like when we had spoke about Allie, my niece, L'Oreal's daughter, who can so clearly speak about what anxiety feels like, what it means to her, as early as 8 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah,
what she said to you the other day about how she gets up. Yeah.
Yeah, how she get up and she just has anxiety. It's just because she's worried the house could be on fire. I'm like, that's crazy.
Well, I think it's good that, the younger generation can talk about it because we didn't have those words. We didn't have trigger and any of those
Something else I
things.
want to speak about on this topic is we talk about this kind of stuff a lot. And there's another vantage point that I'd like to look at it from that takes us kind of outside of this perception where, when you are trying to work through this stuff and when you are trying to, be just a fighter for the greater good, for the community, for the marginalized, there is a reality that you want to push up against the system. You hate the system because the system is what has created this scenario.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a reality within that the system is always going to exist. And if it's not going to be this system, it's going to be another system. How do you then learn and teach yourself how to work within that system while still fighting for the things that you want to fight for? Because the reality is I think that's kind of one of the only ways to be able to do it. Like, you can't change something from the outside. You can only change something from the inside. And it may not be huge change, but it can impart a bigger change. Because if I let in one person like me and then another person like me and then another person like me, then eventually there will be some equalizing going on, right?
Yeah, I think that you have that activist spirit. You have that, I want to change things and I want to, do what I need to do. I never had that. I'm more of a follow the rules. I really do believe you should follow rules and you shouldn't buck the system and you should figure out how to do things within the system. I don't know. I'm just wired that way. It scares me when people go outside of the system or whatever. My mother, too. She had a beauty salon on the west side of Chicago, and she said she'll never forget she was listening to Martin Luther King. He was giving a speech, and he was like maybe a mile from her beauty salon in Chicago, and she was listening to him on the radio. And she said he was speaking so eloquently until she lost her appetite. She said she was actually eating, listening to him, and what he was saying was so powerful that she lost her appetite. And she said, I wished I could go out and protest, but it's just not in me.
Mm-hmm.
And I totally understood that because I don't want to protest either.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, there's a lot of fear there, sounds like. It's a lot of fear. I had a lot of guy friends, a lot of male black friends that said they didn't want to really go out with me when I went in protest because they were afraid. They felt like they were a target. And I don't think, I have compassion for that. I don't think there's any judgments for that. But I think I too like systems because I like to understand the system so that I know how to find the silver lining.
Yeah, I always tell that joke that jail wouldn't bother me because, you got regular meals and when you got to go to bed. And I mean, I don't want to be in jail, but I don't think it would break me.
Mm-hmm.
As I could follow them rules real well.
Yeah. It's very interesting, though, because I feel like there's a lot in my generation, and I'm sure in every generation, where you have people that have so many great ideas and have so many things that they want to, help do, impart on others.
Yeah.
But there's that reality that in order to do that, there's a system here that I then have to figure out how to infiltrate. And I don't know if infiltrate is the right word, but there's a system here that I have to figure out how to have the language to participate in. And then I have to figure out how to articulate these big ideas to people that don't even understand my vocabulary.
Right.
I do feel like sometimes I, want to do too much or I care too much or something like that. Like I do feel that way. And I do think of people that, maybe we don't know their names, but there's a lot of people that wanted to do things like Martin Luther King or Malcolm X or whatever, like you said. And then you think about them being murdered. You know what I mean? That's really sad, because you're like, damn, they just wanted to make people feel that they were important and bring a sense of community. And so all those things you think about, but at the end of the day, I can only be me.
Yeah.
And there's something that Malcolm X said that I always love so much, where he said, you can't kill someone that's already dead. And I know that sounds really scary, but I really do feel like, we're just here for a blink of an eye. Yeah. We're not here for a long time. This life is not mine anyway. If I'm only here for a good time, not a long time, then why don't I really follow my heart and do what makes sense to me? And that doesn't mean every day, every morning, I'm over here sitting trying to figure out how to write legislation. Like that's not what I'm saying.
Right.
But if I feel the need to speak out, then I'll speak out. If I feel the need to say something or to support something or to, if I feel drawn to care about issues, well, then I'm going to live in that because it's in me to do,
And my mother would be proud of you, even though she couldn't go out and protest. She wasn't, didn't feel right about it. Now her granddaughter will. You were protesting.
Well, I think
there you go.
But I think that's the expression of what that lady had told me, that meditation lady, when she said, when you free yourself, you free your ancestors, because that actually is her voice. Those are the voices of the voiceless. My freedom and my ability to say the things that I'm even saying right now on this podcast are representative of those who could not say it at that time. And so I think that's also a part of where I get that strength from, ancestrally, whatever you want to call it. It's in me, like they say. It's not on me. Okay, let me talk to Shahem and get into this with him. All right, y'all, let's get into some vacation math for a hot second. Okay, so let's say we got 4 best friends who are all in desperate need of a reset and maybe a multi-day girlfriends marathon. To me, the solution is simple. A last-minute girls trip and an Airbnb, baby. Sometimes you just don't want to be cramped up in a room trying to get your rest and relaxation on. Trust me, some trips are just better in an Airbnb. Take my 30th birthday, for example. I just wanted to spend quality time with my girlies, and instead of us having to squeeze into a teeny tiny hotel room, we were able to book a local guest favorites listing that had a backyard, okay, listen closely, jacuzzi, and enough room for us all to sit back and get our gab fest on. Talk about an amazing birthday present. And the best part? The privacy. You know us Virgos need some peace and quiet every once in a while. And with Airbnb, I can make sure I am booking a place far away from prying eyes. So go ahead, book that last minute getaway and make some memories. Your friends will thank you later. Baby, this is Keke. Let me tell you, I'm so thrilled to have this guest with us today because his work is truly shaking things up. Shahem Mclaurin is a clinical social worker and therapist who rose to prominence on social media through his potent mixture of social commentary and motivational messages, pointing out that we cannot talk about mental health without talking about social injustice. I'm so excited to have you here. Shahem, how you doing, love?
I'm doing amazing. Thank you for having me.
Oh my gosh, thank you for being here. I mean, how's everything been going? What have you been up to lately?
Child, a lot of work. I've been working all day, client after client. You never go out of business in this business. I can tell you that much.
That's a good thing. We need some good help out there. So I'm glad to hear that people are coming in and getting that good talk, okay? Now, I want to talk to you today because your work is at the intersection of mental health and social injustices. And I think that there is so much good in that, but also so much stress in that. So I would love to ask you a little bit about how you take care of yourself in the midst of doing this necessary but very taxing work.
Well, first off, thank you for the question. I get asked that so often. And the answers to a lot of my questions come down to the same thing. And I think you'll find that today. But community, I am nothing without the people around me. I have my own therapist, my online community, my friends who hold me up all the time. I'm always motivated by my nieces and nephews. That is the thing that holds me down the most when I'm going through it and when I'm doing this work. The only reason I do this work is for community, and naturally, that's the thing that keeps me going too.
I feel the same way. Community is what keeps me going too. And I think it started in childhood. So I'd love to hear about kind of like how you grew up. What was your background? What was it like with your family and friends? Were you kind of like Michael from Good Times and always about the social justice? Or what was it like growing up?
I am originally from Baltimore. Shouts out to down the hill. I actually got my start like in community organizing in high school in Baltimore. Working for yeah. I did so many things back in Baltimore. I ran like youth programming for hundreds of inner city youth. I helped take care of the tree canopy there. I did so many cool things with people in my community, and that is where it started. That's where I got my start. Like when there was unrest because of the death of Freddie Gray, I helped to organize around that. But yeah, I've been doing community organizing since high school, which steered me on this path. And I actually, oddly enough, I didn't want to be a social worker or a therapist, but it found me. And I'm glad it did. I went to school to get my master's in social work strictly so I could be a better community organizer. And I just happened to be learning how to be a therapist at the same time. And my mentor was like, you need to put boot on the ground and work with people interpersonally. And that really did cement a lot of the work I do. That's why I actually have an online presence, is because I really wanted to continue my work sharing things with the general public, making things accessible, especially mental health care. And it's a part of what I do. I love it. I wouldn't do anything else. Like, naturally, I was against it going into it, but now it's just like something that is just such a core and integral part of me as a person.
When you say that it found you, I really am connected to that, because I think purpose is a lot of times something that people feel like is outside of them, that they have to chase, or that feels like it's only accessible to some people, and some people just know it and other people just don't. But I really do think it's something inside of us that we manifest externally, that it does just kind of come to us when we walk into our path. What was it for you? What was like that moment that you feel like it became apparent to you that this is what you had to do? Like, was there a scenario or something that happened, or just, you found yourself there?
So I was resistant, like, for a really long time. I'm not gonna hold you. But it was when I got my first job. My mentor helped me get my first job. Dr. Linda LaSalle Bryant from NYU. She is amazing. She's such a phenomenal woman.
Oh, shout
But
out to you.
she helped me get my first job, and I was doing family therapy for preventative care. And I'm a former foster kid, so
Oh,
when I
wow.
worked, yeah, I worked. I grew up with my family, but I experienced being in kinship care, so I know what it's like to be in the foster care system. It's rough, it's hard. The families need a lot of support and resources, and that is part of why I was so opposed to going into that specific field, the field that I'm in now, is because I knew that, like, I've experienced trauma around it. But the second I got on the
Mm.
other end of it, like the other side of that role, it just kind of snapped into place. And all of the things that I've experienced, all of the things that I've gone through, the hardships, it actually wound up being the thing that made me more relatable as a therapist. And so many of the people who were mandated to work with me, they were so much more comfortable compared to, like, my other counterparts, my peers, because they knew that they could relate to me.
It's very tough to imagine that the things that we've gone through are again, it's our testimony that's leading us into our purpose. But as a faithful person, that is 100% what I believe, and I feel like your story is a testimony to that and what you're saying. I want to know, what were some of the challenges or some of the things that you faced when starting to embark on this career, that you had to come to terms with yourself, like how it brought these things to light that you dealt with very young. How was that? What was that experience like?
Oof, it was hard. I have been forced, and still, even to this day, I'm forced
Yeah.
very often to look myself in the mirror and face the ugliest parts of myself, because it is just the
Mm.
truth, right? When you do this type of work where you are helping people to cope with life, to work through some of their deepest traumas, you have to do the same, because if you don't, you kind of become a hypocrite. And
Oof.
yeah, it's been tough. I think a lot of things that have been internalized that I've experienced, like, I'm from the hood, like, we like to wild
Mm-hmm.
out every now and again. And
Period.
I used to be a crash out. And I really had to get a grip on even my anger and how I respond to things and where it was coming from, and generational trauma, and, like, how
Mm.
that shows up, how it's passed on, how shame works in family systems, you name it. All of
Yep.
it. Yeah.
I love what you're speaking to, because it's so true. So many of us are carrying, whether it's being Black, whether it's whatever specific different community we could be from, whether it's the queer community, I'm a this, that, we all have so many different things that define who we are. And that comes with whatever social biases. And then even sometimes gene stuff. When you think about Black American history, just what it was to have endured what we've endured here. When did it become clear to you, social injustices and systemic racism, how it is really a big impact on mental health in the community? When did you start to realize, like, oh, wait a minute, boom, like that's a big part of what's happening, and this is the result?
So I'm gonna keep it 1,000 with you, okay? Especially because you deserve the truth. I was there before I even got to this position as a therapist, which is why I didn't want to be a therapist. A huge part of it was that I understood how even the mental health system, the institution of mental health care in the United States specifically, how it is geared towards kind of perpetuating a lot of those issues, is not accessible, and it doesn't really address
Mm.
in many ways the systemic issues that we have. So I was, like, very much
Mm.
so organizer. I wanted to be out there with the people. I didn't think that
Mm.
this was super helpful work, but now that I'm here and I have a deeper understanding, I know that it is not only important work, but it's important to shift the way that we go about this work and make the two connect. And I think part of why it wasn't working before and why I was so adamantly against it was because I didn't have access to people who thought similar to me, who brought that into this work. But now I do. There's a lot of us out here.
But I think that's the thing within our country as things are evolving and people are getting in positions of power that do know this experience and that do have compassion and understanding of these real human stories that we're talking to. A lot of them have been shut out, and it does become difficult to feel like you can see yourself in it. What was it like realizing or having that light bulb moment where it's like, okay, actually being inside of the system, it actually can be a benefit in a way that I didn't think it was before? Like, how did you get there? Because I think that's something that a lot of us, especially as millennials, we done seen this system crash and burn, honey. And we like, oh, no, ban the establishment. But a lot of times it's like we got to lean into the establishment and work from the inside to make a change on the outside.
Listen, Keke, I told you, like all of my answers are going to come back to community. I would be nothing I am today without the people who guided me along the path. I went through a
Ugh,
lot of racism in grad school, and specifically
wow.
one of my advisors, Dr. J, like one of the coolest men you'll ever meet in your life. He told me when I was going through the racism in grad school, because one of my classmates sent me an email saying they didn't want a Black presence in the classroom, me being one of the only Black people in the classroom. My professor, Dr. J, told me, "You are a disruptor." And I was so taken aback by that. But he was like, every space you enter, you are going to disrupt that space because these spaces are not built with you in mind. He's a Black man. He understands. He was like, you, even your mere presence is causing these people to rethink the way that they look at and see the world. That was one of the moments where it all kind of clicked into place for me because I understood
Mm-hmm.
that these systems, even like that was my in real life example, these systems are not built for us to be there, but I belong here, even though there are obstacles to get where I'm at. When I enter this space, I leave the door open for everybody behind me. And I
Yes.
100% agree. We have to lean into these systems as like, Black people specifically. And
Yeah.
I always encourage like more Black people go into the mental health field. We need you. We need us for real.
Yeah. Yeah, we do, because we have to diversify what it means to have anything, whether it's these issues, those issues, just all of it across the board. Because if we were never there in those spaces, then they're not going to consider us. And I have to remind myself that all the time. So let's talk about it explicitly. How are mental health and social injustice related? Like, to what extent does social injustice impact our mental health?
Oh my God. Where do I begin? There's so many
Right?
facets in how it goes. I can start off with like even in the body, like the physical body, racism impacts our physical health, how we show up in this world. Be it stress hormones like cortisol being passed on to children when they're in utero because their mothers are going through a tremendous amount of stress, like through because of racism, poverty, things along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
Be it the way that white supremacy physically impacts the body, how these histories of torture, of watching people be
Public
murdered,
lynchings.
public lynchings, how that really impacts and embeds itself into a person's DNA via epigenetics. I could talk about how if you really zoom out and look at the way that down to the environment, how Black people are pushed into neighborhoods and communities where the tree canopy, because I used to work on the tree canopy, there's no tree canopy, which increases asthma, which make Black people in large more susceptible to things like asthma, which impacts people's mental health. Having like poor health conditions, like it really impacts how a person feels about themselves, how a person looks, whether we want to talk about the media and why people like you are so important, how we are not represented, how we don't see ourselves. There's a reason why a lot of white people walk around like they're invincible. It's because they see themselves as superheroes in the media all
Yeah.
the time. Um,
Yeah.
how, I mean, I could talk about so many different facets, but ultimately what
Mm-hmm.
it comes down to is dehumanization.
Yes, it's very painful. It's very, very painful. And so much of that has been, obviously, when you think about slavery in America, you have a business, essentially. People are making business. In order for their business to continue to be justified, we have to, over this course of time, continually dehumanize a people so that it supports the interest of this business. If this person is less of a person, then the more that you're going to want to invest in this without, compassion. And we're working against years and years and years of that work. And I'm telling you, man, when I watched Ahmaud Arbery and then George Floyd, I was in my bedroom, and I'm telling you, it was like I was paralyzed. I was sitting down, and I knew that something is wrong. Like, I felt sad before about things, you know what I'm saying? Like, when Trayvon, like, you see this stuff, we almost become, plain to it, where it's like, well, we know something's going to happen. I've seen this. I know about these things all my life. But when this particular season, in this moment, and obviously time was standing still, and COVID and the pandemic, all these things were happening, I'm telling you, there's probably some type of medical, word or something for what I felt in that moment. But I could not even I felt so hopeless in a way that I've never felt before. That I have never felt before in my life. And I remember talking to my girlfriend and saying, she was like, my girlfriend's not Black. And she was like, should we go out there together? Should we go out there? They were marching at the time in California. And I was like, yeah, well, I need to go. Will you go with me? And she was like, yeah, let's go. So me and her husband, we all went out there. And then that was when I had that moment with the National Guard. And I'm telling you, I blacked out in that moment because I just felt so much pain. You know what I mean? I don't even know how to describe it. But like you said, I'm glad that I could just let it out, because a lot of people cannot. And when you're holding that stuff in and holding it in, holding in, it will kill you. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know how you can live with it after a while, because it's just like, it's just so hard to explain, but you just feel so hopeless. That's a terrible feeling to feel.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. And if you want me to be honest, I think so much of it has to do with like this country never really facing the truth about like its origin, the lack of morality that founded this space, but also how shame is taught to people generation to generation, how it is like not only commodified but sold to people, and having people in these spaces where they are so deeply shamed about being people and so worried about making ends meet and getting from day to day and trying to validate their own humanity. Yeah, trying to survive to the point where they can't access things like grief. You're describing hopelessness. That's a part of grieving. You were grieving.
Literally. That's so true. Don't have a moment for grief.
Baby, this is Keke Palmer, yeah.
Ooh, I've got some seriously exciting news to share with y'all. Audible has just dropped their best of 2024 picks, and let me tell you, this list got some heavy hitters on it, y'all. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm always on the hunt for the freshest, most compelling titles out there on the market. And baby, Audible has really outdone themselves this year. From edge-of-your-seat dystopian dramas to swoon-worthy romances, they've got it all. Take, for instance, an almost unbelievably star-studded production of George Orwell's 1984. It's a true masterclass in audio storytelling that both honors the original and breathes new life into it. And if you're looking for a little heart-fluttering romance, you gotta check out Emily Henry's Funny Story. It's the perfect blend of humor and passion. But that's just the tip of the iceberg, my lovelies. Audible's Best of 2024 also features some of the year's most powerful memoirs, like Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson's Lovely One, as well as cutting-edge fiction from authors like Kristen Hanna and Percival Everett. This collection has something for everyone, so you definitely don't want to miss out on the best Audible has to offer. And remember, there's more to imagine when you listen. Go to audible.com/best of the year and discover the year's best waiting for you. You're speaking about epigenetics as well, which I think is so important, especially when you think about certain mental health stuff that people attribute to our community, whether it be, ADHD or depression or, just some of these things that we hear about often, or, whether it's anger or, mismanaged anger, etc. I'm curious, in your line of work, what are some of these common mental health things that we know about that are directly connected to these kinds of social injustices?
I am really biased, so keep that in mind when I say this. I'm specifically an EMDR therapist. It stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy. It's an intensive trauma therapy. So I really work with
Yeah.
people who have severe trauma very often. And with that, I can say I have witnessed people's the root of a lot of people's like disorders, a lot of people's anger, stress, it all be traced back to being in and growing up in a very harsh, abusive, racist, sexist world. Like it is really hard to exist in this world.
Yeah.
And people accrue so much trauma as a result, and they store it in their bodies, especially if we don't know how to access metabolizing that trauma and grieving properly. And it's not something that's
Mm.
taught because it's intentional not to teach that, because people would be in a much different space if they had access to it. There's a reason why during the pandemic, when people had an opportunity to sit with themselves, so many people came out of that so transformed, including myself. Um, it's all a part of
Me
it.
too, yeah.
Yeah.
I love that word metabolize because that's the thing too. Somebody had recently wanted me to do some EDMR therapy, and I was a little bit apprehensive, not totally sure how to embrace it because obviously it's a extreme, it's like an intense process. I'm sure I'll try it at some point, but this idea that you have moved on from something, but you didn't actually process the emotions in it, right? You know, you can have gone through stuff in your life and say, well, that was because of this, and I know how it got there. But it's not a justification. It's just an explanation. And now you have to deal with what it did to you. That dealing with what it did to you gag, that's a whole thing within itself, honey. It's just crazy.
Listen, trust me, I know I do it every day, all day, and people don't even recognize sometimes how much trauma lives in the body. It literally lives in your body. You feel it all throughout your body. And some people are just so disconnected because connecting means feeling hurt and pain. And it's easier to avoid that, if anything. But that's why I try to do what I do to like spread this information as much as I possibly can. I want it to be accessible. People deserve to know these things. People deserve to have access to healing, and I believe
Mhm.
like that the way our society is structured, it literally keeps people away from it. And you should not have to buy your way into knowing how to heal yourself.
So, is it insane to imagine this idealistic society where there's none of the isms or the phobias or, all this different stuff that they put? Or is the journey really learning how to find peace within yourself while dealing in this world that's never kind of going to be peaceful, so to speak?
Kiki, you know what I love about humanity and human beings? It's that we can hold two truths at the same time, because I believe like that it is important that we not only imagine, but like really feel secure in the idea of a world free of a lot of the oppressive structures that we exist within, but also that we
Hmm.
should always like lean towards trying to find peace within this stuff. There's a reason why joy
Yeah.
is a practice and not just like an emotion. You have to actively seek joy and seek peace throughout this entire process, or you can lose yourself in it or be burnt out and reach that spot that we're talking about where you can't feel it and you feel just as worn down if you don't address it. You have to know how to pace yourself while doing this type of work, while imagining these things, and know that it's not going to be done overnight, but it definitely can be done.
Ah, I love that. I love that feeling of hope. Like you said, positivity, knowing things can change, but ultimately knowing the change you want to see most immediately is going to come from you and your
Mhm.
community. When you think about the things that need to be changed in social injustices, has there been any that you feel like you've seen progress in real time where you've been like, oh wow, this is good. We're moving positively in a good direction.
I'll be honest, it's been a lot of regression lately. It's been a lot of regression lately because of people whose names I won't mention. But I think every
Ciao.
every time there's a step in the right direction in history, there's a step back. I will say that, lately we've seen with the rise of social media, so many people becoming conscious, like the public consciousness is being elevated and raised. There are issues
Mm-hmm.
that people feel so vastly different about than people who did like 70, 60, 50 years ago. And it's because of the power of community and the ability to express ourselves and to communicate across and not just down and up. I think it is so important to like really acknowledge like, you know, all of the progress and the hope and the joy. We have information, and that's something that has been so guarded and protected for centuries. And now it's
Yes.
a lot of it is in the hands of the people. I won't say all of it, but a lot of it is in the hands of the people. And we get to disseminate this information and help other people out, raise the consciousness in ways that we never were able to before.
And that is what I do love about social media, about the internet in general. I know that there's a lot of negativity that can come with it, and the algorithm chooses the most negative thing. But honey, if you're really searching for the positive thing, you can have so much access to information that you otherwise, honey, I'll be on Google morning, noon, and night, finding out why did I feel this way? You know, and the AIs, you can ask them AIs a couple of questions that you can't even really ask nobody. Like, so it's like there is access to being able to get information, like you're saying, which I think is the most important thing when trying to put a name or just a defining word to some of the things that we're feeling. Last question. What would you say to someone that is obviously feeling the effects of social injustice, but kind of wanting to protect their peace, so to speak, you know, afraid to kind of lean in or go outside of their community or their family and take themselves out of what they would consider joy and disrupt their quote unquote peace with all this stuff that they wish they could fix, but they ultimately feel hopeless in actually creating a change within?
I always say that my favorite B word is balance. And if you find yourself living in one extreme, you're probably doing something wrong. And that's true for both the positive and negative. There is up and down for a reason. And I think you should always be checking in with yourself or checking as often as you can around where you're living at, because you can be disillusioned very quickly if you try to live only in the positive. Typically, when we try to cut off one emotion or one experience, we often cut ourselves off from the other ones too. And what you might think is peace and positivity is nothing of the sort. It can be an illusion real quick if you aren't like living a balanced life.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. Speaking of balance, you be cooking?
I do be cooking. Down.
Ooh, come on, Dr. Durag. Yes.
Another thing too, I refuse to become one thing, and one thing that I try to do as a therapist is humanize therapy and us as people. People love to, you know, there is a lot of negativity online. I get you're a therapist, you shouldn't X, Y, and Z. I'm a person first, okay?
Yes.
And I will always be a person first. So always, yeah. Thank you for
Yeah, I
acknowledging.
love that. Yes. And I need whoever you're getting your Durex from, because they really are always on point. It's always got a little shimmer, a little shine. The colors be popping. So yeah, I'm going to need that link.
Thank you. It's a beauty supply store.
Period. Well, Shahem, this conversation has obviously been amazing. I'm just so enlightened and really proud of you, you know what I mean, in the work that you're doing, because it's not of the faint of heart, but that's what we need. And also to see you be so jovial and so gregarious. It's like you said, that humanizing and having that joy while in the midst of doing such meaningful work is important. So I appreciate you for that, and I want you to know that. Now, before I let you go, I like to play a game with my guests, okay? And this one is called Your Problem or Oppressive System. So I'm going to list a bunch of behaviors people struggle with these days, and then you tell me if it's more fair for people to blame themselves or the society they live in. Make sense?
Okay.
Okay, this is the first one. Narcissism. Your problem or oppressive system?
Ooh, oppressive system.
Now give it to me. Let's dig into this, because I also, in my mind, thought oppressive system, and I could say why, but I'm not the one with the degree. So you go.
Well, I do believe like it's all of these are going to come down to a combination of both. I think it's important to acknowledge that we live within a society that creates narcissists. There's a reason behind that. We have a very celebrity obsessed culture, which is like fine, but it gets to the extreme very often. Well, let me not say it's fine, because obsessed is where it goes too far.
Right.
But even beyond celebrity, narcissism is a direct result of trauma. And we exist in a society that creates a lot of trauma. Just like a lot of crime is a result of poverty, like narcissism is a direct result of a society that creates the conditions for people to be traumatized.
I love how you said that it is a combination of both, though, because absolutely things are a result of where you're from. But then there's also that piece where it's like, choice. But I do think it's funny because everybody is expecting everyone to be a rose that grew from concrete. It's like, damn, put some grass around me, boo. Like, why we all gotta grow from the damn concrete? They expect everybody to like have that outcome that's just like so hard to have. So I do love that you said like it's a combination of both because you can only do what you know to do. Social media addiction, your problem or oppressive system?
Ooh. Oppressive system. We are living in a loneliness epidemic, Keke, and it is
Speak on the loneliness. Woo.
yes, it's a combination of things, but I think a large thing that contributes to it is the reduction of third spaces.
Now, what is that? What do you mean third spaces?
There are places that are outside of a person's home and outside of their work, like places where people can go and just be in community together without having to work and without being home. These are places like parks. We used to have a lot of public pools. We know what happened to those after Jim Crow was stricken down.
I remember going to the public pools as a kid. I didn't even realize that with the connection of why they disappeared.
That reduction of third spaces takes away a lot of opportunity for people to connect and to be in community with one another. But not only that, social media is just accessible. People are desperate for community. A lot of people don't have time nor the means to get out and connect with people. A lot of people are in survival mode, and that is just one way to distract ourselves from it all. I believe that we exist within a society that creates the conditions for people to be social media obsessed. And it is also about like personal habits and boundaries with technology.
Wow. Wait a minute. Speak on this public pools thing really quickly. What happened? What do you mean with that?
So I don't know if you've ever seen the picture of this man pouring battery acid inside of the pool after pools were desegregated. But after desegregation, a lot of public pools in the South especially were shut down because they could no longer be segregated or whites only. Yeah, a lot of them were filled up with concrete and many other things.
And it's interesting because Illinois is super, super segregated. And I do remember in my neighborhood, it literally was like predominantly black. You know what I mean? Like I don't even really remember seeing that many white people. So I grew up where we had this community place called the CETA, and we did have like a little public pool. So when you had mentioned it, I mean, it didn't stay around long, but we did have a little stuff, but it was all community driven, which is so interesting here, what you're saying. Like it was literally stuff that we created within our community and I don't even know if it's still around anymore, but that's why I was like, that's interesting. That's crazy. Okay. Eating disorders, your problem or oppressive system?
Oppressive systems. I'm sorry, it's going to be that every time.
I mean, obviously, yeah.
if you exist in a society that only like positively uplifts a specific body type or a specific type of person, it's bound to be a result. We exist within a very fat phobic, like colorist, racist.
And you need an
society.
hourglass, the hourglass shape. They want me, the hourglass. Everybody got to have an hourglass.
It's like a Coke bottle. I can't give that. Not all the time, no. Sometimes, but not always.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. Now this is an interesting one. I'm interested to see. Contributing to climate change. Your problem or oppressive system?
It's both. I'm sorry. That was definitely both. Let me tell you something, Keke. The other day, I almost stopped my car to curse somebody out because they threw stuff out their goddamn window. Like, I hate when people litter. Stop littering.
Yeah.
Please, Lord. So yes, it's both us, but also acknowledging that like the largest polluter in the world is the US military. Like there are entire complexes that are the major perpetrators of climate change. Wars, for example, and genocides where people are being bombed heavily contribute to, ruining the environment. That's not what the environment wants, to be blown to pieces.
Oof. Climate change. That one is just coming at us slowly but surely. Ooh.
But we do have to also make our own personal choices.
It's true. I hear everything that you're saying with the whole both. I don't feel that there's a space where there's no accountability, but it is like, again, what I was saying, we can't expect everybody to be a rose that grew from concrete, which means we can't always expect a miracle. You know what I'm saying? Some things have to be supported to make a change. You know what I mean? I can't know what my mind can't know. I can't be what I haven't seen. That is true to a certain extent. But yes, miracles do happen. People are able to come from traumatic, terrible situations and make it out and become, whoever. But we can't can't always expect that. That's not realistic. Last one, apathy, aka laziness. Your problem or oppressive system?
Oof, oppressive system. I'm sorry. Like, listen, it's a combination of both. Because I think a lot of things come down to choice. We have choice. And let me be clear, I in no way, shape, or form will ever permit like taking all of your choice away and giving it up to these systems, because we have choice. We can lay down and die, or we can get up.
But a good piece to what you're saying and to why the social injustice totally intertwines with the mental health is like my mother said, growing up in poverty, growing up where we were, the idea of choice, it actually doesn't feel real. People actually really don't know they have choice. So yes, choice may be available to you, but if you have been in a system that has taken away your choice constantly, then mentally you simply cannot go there. And so it's like that was the whole reason why my parents moved, drove 4 days and 3 nights out of Illinois to California to help me pursue my dreams, was to make me know. If it was one thing they could do, was try to let me and their other children know that we had choice. They could only do that in action by making a crazy change based in faith. But again, that's not always the outcome in the scenario. So I love what you're saying, because it's not taking away the reality that it's up to us, but it's understanding that it being up to us is a reality that many of us don't know we have responsibility for if we have been in these systems that keep telling us something else. So it's very tricky.
Yeah, that goes back to dehumanization, because that's very much so integral to being a human, knowing that you have choice. When you exist in a system that is constantly dehumanizing you, you lose it. Trust me, I literally was just telling one of my clients that resourcefulness is a huge part of being able to overcome obstacles. And people are often stripped into that and forced into learned helplessness because they are being dehumanized and stripped of access to that part of their humanity.
I just live for you. I truly do. You really just ate that up.
It's beautiful.
I thank you so much for coming on this show, for giving us your knowledge, your wisdom, and your heart. Again, the work that you're doing is necessary, and I'm just so glad to know you.
Thank you so much, Keke. Honestly, I'm honored. I'm the honored one here. My God, what an icon.
I really admire what Shahem's doing out there. I mean, he's tackling some tough issues head on, but he's also finding ways to keep his peace and stay grounded while doing it. I think my takeaway is that balance is the key to doing it right, especially when you're up against systems that are overwhelming. And I'm just glad that people are taking notice of his work and the difference that he's making, because it's powerful stuff. Keep taking care of yourself out there, and I'll catch you soon, because you know it's your girl.
Baby, this is Keke